Right now, more than 72,000 restaurants have closed across America in the last 2 years alone. Tens of thousands of people lost their jobs, and nobody is talking about what's really behind it. This isn't about bad food or changing trends. It's about something far more calculated. Private equity firms, sale-leaseback schemes, and decades of financial engineering that quietly gutted the places your family called special. By the time we're done here, you'll know exactly which chains are gone, why they really died, and who made millions while they did it. And number 1, a chain that served 64 million Americans every single year, destroyed not by competition, not by bad reviews, but by a shrimp promotion nobody ever asked for. Let's count it down. Number 10, Kenny Rogers Roasters. You might not have thought about Kenny Rogers Roasters in 20 years, but the second you hear the name, something clicks. That smell. That rotisserie chicken slowly spinning behind the glass. The cornbread. Here's what most people don't realize. Kenny Rogers Roasters wasn't some novelty side project. At its peak, it was one of the most decorated fast casual chains in the country, winning America's Choice Award for Best Chicken Chain 3 years in a row. The numbers back that up. Founded in 1991, the chain grew to 425 restaurants worldwide, with $300 million in annual sales. That's not a gimmick. That's a legitimate restaurant empire. Kenny Rogers himself co-founded it alongside John Y. Brown Jr., the former Kentucky governor, who had also been an early investor in KFC. These weren't amateurs. They knew the chicken business cold. The chain even got a Seinfeld episode, Season 7, The Chicken Roaster. Kramer gets completely hooked on the rotisserie chicken. The company's own spokesperson called it the equivalent of millions in free advertising. That's how culturally embedded this brand was in the mid-90s. The real reason it collapsed? The same story you'll hear over and over on this list. Debt, overexpansion, and a 1998 bankruptcy filing that put everything up for sale. Nathan's Famous acquired the brand for just $1.25 million. Less than most people's houses cost today. The last US location closed in 2011. Here's the kicker. Kenny Rogers Roasters is absolutely thriving overseas. Over 200 locations still operate across Malaysia, Singapore, the Philippines, and the Middle East. The brand that couldn't survive in the country that gave it its name is beloved across Southeast Asia. For middle-class American families who grew up on that chicken, that stings. And if you think that's a rough story, wait until you hear what happened to the chain that once had 504 locations and destroyed itself with a mascot named Mr. Delicious. Number 9, Rax Roast Beef. Most people under 40 have never heard of Rax. That's exactly the problem. In the mid-1980s, Rax Roast Beef was Arby's biggest competitor, a legitimate national chain with 504 locations across 38 states. If you grew up in the Midwest or Southeast in the 80s, there was almost certainly a Rax within driving distance. Here's what most people don't realize. Rax was actually ahead of its time. It offered a full salad bar, baked potatoes, and a rotating menu that went well beyond roast beef. That kind of customizable, fresh-ish fast food is exactly what chains like Chipotle built their empires on 30 years later. At peak in 1985, the chain generated hundreds of millions in sales and employed thousands across the country. It was, by any measure, a success story. Then, management made a decision that became a textbook case in how not to brand a restaurant. They launched Mr. Delicious, a bizarre animated businessman character who appeared in television ads sharing his personal problems with the audience while trying to sell sandwiches. Viewers were confused. Customers were turned off. Sales dropped immediately. The deeper explanation? Rax lost its identity completely. Pizza, Chinese food, tacos, pasta. Everything got added to the menu in a desperate attempt to become everything to everyone, and they ended up meaning nothing to anyone. The original roast beef concept, the thing that actually worked, got buried. Today, 6 Rax restaurants survive. 4 in Ohio, 1 in Kentucky, 1 in Illinois. The trademark is now owned by a former Rax employee from the 1980s who bought it purely out of loyalty and nostalgia. For anyone who grew up eating a Rax regular beef sandwich on the way home from a Little League game, that number is brutal. It gets worse. Let's talk about a chain whose entire legacy was destroyed in a single night, with no warning and no goodbye. Number 8, Steak and Ale. Here's a name that hits different if you were born before 1980. Steak and Ale wasn't just a restaurant. It was the first place many middle-class American families ever felt like they were dining somewhere genuinely special. Tudor-style architecture, stained glass windows, honey wheat bread that came out warm. And the salad bar? Because here's what most people don't realize. Steak and Ale invented the restaurant salad bar. Founded by Norman Brinker in 1966, Steak and Ale pioneered the concept that would define casual dining for the next 4 decades. Every single salad bar you've ever stood at in a chain restaurant exists because of what Brinker built in Dallas in 1966. At nearly 280 locations, Steak and Ale defined affordable elegance for millions of American families. A real steak dinner, white tablecloths, atmosphere for $12. The data tells the story of what followed. Norman Brinker eventually sold and went on to found Chili's, one of the few casual chains that actually survived. Steak and Ale changed hands multiple times, accumulating debt with each transfer. The brand that invented an entire category of dining had been reduced to 58 locations by 2008, all owned by a parent company called S&A Restaurant Corp. On July 29, 2008, S&A filed Chapter 7. Not Chapter 11, Chapter 7. That means liquidation, no restructuring plan, no second chance, and critically, no notice to employees. Workers showed up for their shifts and found the doors locked. Food was left rotting in refrigerators. On the same day, every Bennigan's corporate location closed identically. 150 restaurants shuttered simultaneously, mid-service, with servers still on the floor. Combined, tens of thousands of jobs vanished overnight. For the families who celebrated anniversaries and graduations there, the silence was deafening. A Revival Steak and Ale opened in Burnsville, Minnesota in July 2024. 1 location. After 16 years. That's what 280 restaurants becomes when the money men are done with it. That brings us directly to a chain that didn't just close. It was destroyed by a public health catastrophe nobody saw coming. Number 7, Chi-Chi's. Chi-Chi's is a name that makes people light up. Fried ice cream, sizzling fajitas, those complimentary chips and salsa that felt like the best part of any dinner. For millions of kids in the 1980s and early 90s, Chi-Chi's was the Mexican restaurant. The one your family drove to on birthdays. The one that smelled like warm tortillas and good memories. Here's what most people don't realize about Chi-Chi's. It was founded in 1975 by Max McGrath and Marno McDermott, and McDermott was a former Green Bay Packers wide receiver. A football player built the most beloved Mexican chain in American history. At peak, Chi-Chi's operated 237 restaurants across the country with over $300 million in annual sales. The brand was synonymous with casual Mexican dining before Applebee's, before Chili's really took off, before anyone had heard of Chipotle. Then came November 2003. A Chi-Chi's location in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania became the source of the largest hepatitis A outbreak in United States history. Contaminated green onions sickened 660 people and killed 4. The lawsuits were immediate and catastrophic. The parent company, Avado Brands, was already in bankruptcy. The brand never recovered. On September 18, 2004, all 65 remaining Chi-Chi's restaurants closed simultaneously. An entire chain, 237 locations at its height, ended not because of debt or competition or private equity, but because of a single food safety failure at a single location. For the families who grew up with it, the loss is still raw. The good news, if you can call it that, is that the founder's son opened a new Chi-Chi's location in Minnesota in late 2025. One restaurant, 20 plus years later. While Chi-Chi's was fighting for survival, another beloved chain was quietly being reduced to almost nothing, right under everyone's noses. Number 6, Friendly's. Friendly's is one of those names that hits people in the chest, not just because of the food, though the Fribble milkshakes and the Jim Dandy sundaes were legitimately iconic, but because of what the brand represented. Unpretentious joy. A place kids actually wanted to go. Here's what most people don't realize. Friendly's was founded in 1935 by two teenage brothers, Presley and Curtis Blake, selling nickel ice cream cones out of a single storefront in Springfield, Massachusetts during the Great Depression. Two kids built a chain that would eventually reach 850 locations across the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. That's not a corporate success story. That's the American dream. The numbers are extraordinary in both directions. At peak, Friendly's served millions of families annually, with a model that combined full sit-down dining with an ice cream parlor. Ice cream sundaes in plastic football helmets. Signature clown face meals for kids. The Fribble, which is still considered one of the great milkshakes in American food history by people who remember it. During the 2008 financial crisis, Friendly's began cracking under its debt load. It filed bankruptcy in 2011, was sold, appeared to stabilize, then filed again in 2020. This time sold for a heartbreaking $2 million. $2 million for a brand that had fed 3 generations of American families. The real reason is the same story that kills every chain on this list. Debt accumulated through multiple ownership changes, lease obligations that became impossible to service when customer traffic declined, and a menu that hadn't fundamentally evolved in decades. Today, approximately 4 Friendly's locations survive. 4. From 850. Presley Blake, who built the whole thing, lived to 106 years old. He died in 2021. His brother Curtis died at 102 in 2019. They watched the empire they built with nickel ice cream cones essentially disappear. For anyone who grew up in New England or the Mid-Atlantic with Friendly's as a childhood institution, those 4 remaining locations feel less like a tribute and more like a headstone. Quick pause. How many of these restaurants have you actually eaten at? Be real with yourself. If you're counting 4 or more, you're not alone. Drop a like so this reaches people who remember these places. And we're just getting to the big ones. Number 5. Boston Market. Boston Market is unique on this list because its collapse wasn't slow. It was spectacular. And it happened mostly while people weren't watching. In 1993, Boston Market was the hottest restaurant IPO in America. The concept, rotisserie chicken, real sides, home-style food without the drive-thru, felt genuinely new. The stock tripled on its first day. The company was expanding at a rate of 1 new restaurant per day at its peak. Here's what most people don't realize. Boston Market once operated over 1,200 locations nationwide. More than TGI Fridays ever had. More than Chi-Chi's ever had. It was, for a brief moment in the mid-1990s, one of the most aggressively expanding restaurant chains in American history. The 1993 IPO raised a fortune. McDonald's bought the company in 2000 for $173 million when the first expansion cycle collapsed under debt. McDonald's sold it to private equity in 2007. From that point, it was a slow-motion unraveling. By January 2023, the chain still had 300 restaurants. By late 2024, roughly 16 locations remained. Employees showed up to work and found doors locked without notice. Suppliers were owed millions. Health departments began posting violations across multiple states. Workers reported going weeks without paychecks. For middle-class families who grew up on Boston Market's rotisserie chicken and cornbread during the 90s, and who remember how good and how affordable it felt, watching the final chapter play out was genuinely disturbing. This wasn't a graceful exit. It was an abandonment. We're halfway through now, and the pattern is impossible to miss. Overexpansion, private equity, debt, decline. The next 5 are heavier. The next 5 are the ones that feel like a piece of your actual childhood got ripped out. Number 4, Bonanza and Ponderosa steakhouses. Here's a name, or 2 names, that will send half of you back to a specific booth, a specific Sunday, a specific plate of food that felt like abundance. Bonanza and Ponderosa were the kings of the family steakhouse buffet. Launched in 1963 and 1965 respectively, both chains were named after the hit television western Bonanza. And Bonanza the restaurant was actually co-founded by Dan Blocker, the actor who played Hoss Cartwright on the show. A television cowboy built one of the great American steakhouse chains. That's a detail that deserves more attention than it gets. Here's what most people don't realize. At combined peak, Bonanza and Ponderosa operated over 1,300 locations across the United States. 1,300 family steakhouses. Kids loading up plates at the all-you-can-eat buffet. Steaks for prices that actually matched a working family's budget. Salad bars that felt like a reward. The 2 chains merged under Metro Media in 1989. The consolidation that was supposed to create strength created confusion instead. 2 competing brands under one ownership structure, fighting for the same customers in the same markets. Quality slipped. Locations closed. The buffet model that had been revolutionary in the 1970s started feeling tired by the 1990s. Fat Brands, which now owns dozens of struggling chains, currently controls both names. Roughly 15 Ponderosa and 3 Bonanza locations survive, from 1,300 combined to 18. For anyone who grew up in a family where Ponderosa was a genuine treat, where you got to pick your own sides and feel like you had choices, that number is hard to sit with. And if Ponderosa's decline feels like the slow erosion of a childhood memory, the next chain story is the complete disappearance of one. 1,000 locations turned into nothing. Number 3, Howard Johnson's before McDonald's. Before Denny's. Before any of the chains you grew up thinking were always there was Howard Johnson's. This is the one most younger viewers won't recognize, but for anyone over 50, Hojo's isn't just a restaurant. It's practically a sensory memory. The orange roof, the weather vane on top, walking in from a long car trip and knowing exactly what you were going to order. Here's what most people don't realize. Howard Johnson's was once the largest restaurant chain in America, not just in a category, not just in casual dining, but in the entire country. Over 1,000 restaurants with 500 attached motor lodges during the 1960s and 70s, the brand that defined American road travel for 3 full decades. The data is almost incomprehensible. Founded in 1925 in Quincy, Massachusetts, by Howard Deering Johnson, who started with a single patent medicine store and a borrowed $2,000, the chain grew to become the roadside institution of mid-century America. 28 flavors of ice cream, clam strips, the hot dog in a toasted bun that Hojo's literally invented. At peak, Hojo's did more food sales than McDonald's and Burger King combined. During the 1973 oil embargo, the highway traffic that kept every one of those 1,000 restaurants alive simply stopped. Over 85% of Hojo's revenue came from travelers. When Americans stopped driving, Howard Johnson's started dying. The British Imperial Group purchased it for $630 million in 1980 and resold it to Marriott just 5 years later for $314 million, a $316 million loss in 5 years. That tells you everything about how the brand was deteriorating. The consequence is almost poetic in its sadness. The last Howard Johnson's restaurant in America, the final orange roof, the final plate of fried clams, the final scoop of any of those 28 flavors, was in Lake George, New York. It closed in June 2022. 97 years of American dining history. Gone. For the families who stopped at a Hojo's on every single road trip from 1950 through 1990, the closing of that last location wasn't just news. It was a funeral. Before we get to the top 2, drop a comment below. Which restaurant on this list hits you hardest? The answer in the comments might surprise you. Number 2, TGI Fridays. TGI Fridays is where this starts to feel personal for a lot of people. Because Fridays wasn't just a restaurant, it was an event. Going to Fridays meant something. The stripes on the wall, the loaded potato skins, the Jack Daniel's glazed ribs, the bartenders who flipped bottles. As a kid in the 80s or 90s, Fridays felt genuinely exciting, loud and fun, and a little bit grown up in a way that made birthdays there feel like a real celebration. Here's what most people don't realize. TGI Fridays didn't start as a family restaurant. It was founded in 1965 on 63rd Street in Manhattan by Alan Stillman, a single guy who invested his own $5,000 and borrowed another $5,000 from his mother, specifically to create a place where young singles could meet. It became one of the first singles bars in New York City, the bar that accidentally turned into America's favorite casual dining chain. At peak in 2008, TGI Fridays operated 601 U.S. locations doing approximately $2 billion in annual sales. It employed hundreds of thousands of people. For a full generation of American families, it was the reliable choice, the place where everyone could agree. Then came the private equity transaction that began the chain's slow execution. Tri-Artisan Capital Partners and Sentinel Capital acquired Fridays in 2014 for $890 million, immediately loading the operating company with $670 million in debt. That debt didn't go toward improving kitchens or training staff or updating the menu. It went toward making the acquisition math work for investors. The real reason Fridays died is that nothing changed when everything needed to. For nearly 2 decades, the menu barely evolved. The atmosphere that felt electric in 1985 started feeling dated by 2005 and exhausted by 2015. While Fridays stayed still, the entire restaurant industry moved toward fast casual, toward delivery, toward experiences that felt current. On November 2nd, 2024, TGI Fridays filed Chapter 11. At that point, only 163 U.S. locations remained. By April 2025, just 85 locations survived, from 601 to 85. That's an 86% reduction in the chain's American presence. For the families who had birthday traditions there, who brought their own kids to the same booths their parents brought them to, the closure of their local Fridays wasn't just inconvenient, it erased a ritual. And if TGI Fridays' story makes you angry, if the private equity angle makes you want to throw something, wait until you hear number 1. Because number 1 is the same story, multiplied by 10, with a shrimp promotion nobody asked for sitting in the middle of it like evidence. Number 1, Red Lobster. And here's where it all comes together. Say Red Lobster to anyone between 35 and 65 and watch their face change. They're back in a booth, Cheddar Bay biscuits on the table, someone's birthday, someone's graduation. The restaurant that said to millions of middle-class families, we made it, at least for tonight. Here's why it's number 1. This isn't just a bankruptcy story. It's the most documented, infuriating example of what private equity does to American institutions. Founded in 1968, nearly 700 locations, 64 million customers a year, $2.25 billion in sales in 2019 alone. Golden Gate Capital bought it in 2014 for $2.1 billion, then immediately executed a $1.5 billion sale leaseback of 500 properties. They pocketed the cash and left Red Lobster paying $190 million per year in rent before a single employee got paid. That money didn't go back into the restaurants. It went to investors. That's the whole playbook. Then, Thai Union Group, Red Lobster's majority owner, was also its primary shrimp supplier. That conflict of interest led directly to making Ultimate Endless Shrimp a permanent menu item. Red Lobster lost $11 million in a single quarter. The new CEO's response? I know how to do math. May 19th, 2024. Less than $30 million cash on hand. At least 130 locations closed. Thousands of jobs gone. Research shows private equity-owned companies go bankrupt 10 times more often than others. 10 times. The places you love are not protected. They are assets, and assets get extracted. Stop feeling guilty for missing them. You didn't fail these restaurants. They failed you. Drop one word below. Which chain hit you hardest? Hit subscribe for more of this. No fluff, just truth. The next video is on your screen right now.